August 1939. The world wakes to impossible news. Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn enemies locked in ideological war for years, have signed a pact of friendship. Fascists and communists shaking hands in Moscow. Newspapers across Europe struggle to explain it. Politicians scramble for answers. Citizens feel the ground shift beneath them. But the real shock is not what was announced. It is what was not. Behind closed doors, in a room ordinary Europeans would never see, Stalin and Hitler agreed to something far darker than peace. A secret put on paper. A map redrawn in silence. What did they sign that night? And why, 80 years later, does Russia still refuse to admit the truth? August 1939. Europe stands at the edge of collapse. Hitler has already swallowed Austria and Czechoslovakia. Poland knows it is next. Britain and France have promised to defend Polish independence, but their guarantees feel hollow. Neither country is ready for war, and everyone knows it. Stalin watches from Moscow and calculates. He has seen the West hesitate before. He has seen them sacrifice smaller nations to buy time. Now he has to decide. Does he align with democracies that distrust him, or make a deal with the fascist who wants to destroy him? For Hitler, the math is simple. He wants Poland. But a war on two fronts, against France and Britain in the West and the Soviet Union in the East, would be suicide. He needs Stalin neutral, just for now, just long enough. For Stalin, the calculation is darker. War is coming no matter what. The question is when, and where, and who bleeds first. If he can turn Hitler west and buy a year or two, maybe the capitalist powers will tear each other apart while the Red Army prepares. So in the last days of August, the world watches as two sworn enemies announce a non-aggression pact. On paper, it is a promise not to fight. A temporary truce between ideological opposites. Shocking, yes, but in the chaos of 1939, perhaps understandable. But the real agreement was not in the treaty the cameras saw. It was in the pages that stayed hidden. On August 23, 1939, while the world focused on the public treaty, a second document lay on the table in Moscow. No cameras recorded it. No diplomats outside the room knew it existed. The secret protocol attached to the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact contained no grand declarations and no political theory. It was a list, a division of territory, a redrawing of borders that would determine the fate of 6 nations and tens of millions of people. The protocol identified spheres of influence across Eastern Europe. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia fell under Soviet control. Lithuania was initially assigned to Germany, though that would change within weeks. Poland, the nation both powers publicly claimed to respect, was split down the middle along the Nerev, Vistula, and San rivers. The eastern half would belong to Stalin, the western half to Hitler. Bessarabia, a region of Romania, was marked for Soviet annexation. Germany expressed no interest in it. The language was clinical and bureaucratic. There were no references to the people who lived in these places. There was no acknowledgement of existing governments or borders recognized by international law. The protocol treated sovereign nations as vacant property to be claimed. Each territory was reduced to a geographic designation. It became a line on a map, a problem solved through negotiation between two men in a room. This was not conquest, framed as ideology or liberation. It was partition, presented as administrative efficiency. The protocol made no attempt to justify the division morally or politically. It simply stated what would happen. Finland goes here. Poland splits there. Bessarabia transfers to the Soviet Union. The matter was settled not through war or referendum, but through ink and paper. The mechanism was deliberate in its coldness. Stalin and Hitler were not allies in any ideological sense. They despised each other's systems. but they shared a common interest: expansion without interference. The protocol allowed both dictators to take what they wanted while the other looked away. Germany would move into Poland without Soviet resistance. The Soviet Union would move into the Baltic states and eastern Poland without German objection. Each power received a free hand in its designated zone. What made the protocol extraordinary was not its secrecy. Great powers had made secret deals before. It was the scale and the speed. Within days of signing, both nations would act. Within weeks, the territories listed in the protocol would cease to exist as independent entities. The document did not predict future conflict. It scheduled it. It turned diplomacy into a timetable for invasion. The people living inside these spheres of influence had no warning. Polish officials did not know their country had been divided in a Moscow conference room. Estonian leaders did not know their independence had been bargained away. Bessarabian families did not know their region had been transferred to Soviet control. The protocol was signed in complete silence, and its existence would remain hidden for decades. But the effects would be immediate. The map had been redrawn, the borders had been decided, and the two most powerful dictatorships in Europe now shared an understanding. Neither would stop the other from taking what the protocol promised. Most people stop at the surface of history, but you're still here. So if you want the parts they don't teach, the truths buried beneath time, consider subscribing and becoming part of those who chose to see it all. Now, let's continue. The ink on the pact was barely dry when the world learned what non-aggression truly meant. At 4:45 a.m. on September 1st, 1939, German forces crossed into Poland from the west, north, and south. The Luftwaffe struck airfields before dawn. Panzer divisions rolled across the border in coordinated columns. Polish forces fought back, but they were facing a military machine that had been planning this invasion for months, and it moved with the quiet assurance that no Soviet intervention would come from the east. Because the Soviets were not coming to stop Germany, they were waiting for their turn. For 16 days, Poland fought alone. Britain and France declared war on Germany, but sent no troops. The Polish army retreated eastward, hoping to regroup, to hold a defensive line, to buy time. They moved toward the Soviet border, not as an escape, but as a fallback position. The east was supposed to be neutral ground. It was not. On September 17th, at dawn, Soviet forces crossed into Poland from the east. There was no declaration of war. There was no warning. Just over 500,000 troops moving across a border Poland had assumed was safe. The Red Army advanced quickly. There was almost no resistance. Polish forces were already engaged with Germany, and they had nothing left to defend the eastern frontier. The timing was not coincidence. The geography was not accident. This was the secret protocol in motion. Within days, German and Soviet forces met in the middle of Poland. In the town of Brest-Litovsk, officers from both armies held a joint military parade. They stood side by side. They exchanged salutes. Cameras captured the moment. Two enemies, now partners, dividing a country between them as if it were a map on a table. Poland ceased to exist as an independent state. Not because it fell to one invader, but because two dictators had already decided its fate in a room in Moscow 3 weeks earlier. The pact was no longer a diplomatic abstraction. It was a coordinated act of destruction, planned, timed, and executed with chilling precision. September 1st, 1939. German tanks crossed into Poland from the west. The world watched, horrified but not surprised. What came next shattered any remaining illusions about the pact signed in Moscow just weeks earlier. 16 days later, Soviet forces poured across Poland's eastern border. There was no declaration of war. There was no pretense of defense. It was a coordinated strike that carved the country in half, exactly as the secret protocol had prescribed. Polish soldiers, already fighting desperately against the Wehrmacht, now faced a second invasion from the opposite direction. Within weeks, Poland ceased to exist as an independent state. It was not conquered by one power. It was dismembered by two. The protocol was not a contingency plan. It was a blueprint for territorial surgery. November 1939. Stalin turned his attention north. Soviet troops invaded Finland, expecting a quick victory over a smaller neighbor. The Finns fought back with unexpected ferocity. But the message was clear. The Soviet Union was now actively reshaping its borders, and the secret lines drawn in Moscow gave it license to do so. Then came the summer of 1940. Soviet ultimatums arrived in the capitals of the Baltic states: Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. Accept Soviet military bases. Accept new governments. Accept occupation. Within days, all three countries were absorbed into the Soviet Union. No war, no resistance that could change the outcome. Just the cold execution of what had already been agreed upon in that hidden protocol. June 1940. Romania received its own ultimatum. Surrender, Bessarabia and northern Bukovina. The Romanian government, isolated and without allies, complied. Soviet forces moved in and annexed the territories within 48 hours. What had seemed like a diplomatic maneuver in August 1939 had become an operating system for conquest. The secret protocol was not guiding events. It was dictating them. Every move Stalin made in Eastern Europe traced back to those invisible lines Ribbentrop and Molotov had drawn on a map in Moscow. The Pact had given Hitler the green light to start the war, but it had given Stalin something else: a free hand to redraw the map of Eastern Europe without interference. By mid-1940, the Soviet Union had expanded westward by hundreds of miles. Millions of people who had gone to sleep as citizens of independent nations woke up under Soviet rule. None of it had required Hitler's approval, only his indifference, purchased with that secret agreement. The protocol had stopped being a document. It had become a machine. For 50 years, the Soviet Union denied it ever existed. When survivors spoke of the secret protocol, of the maps, the signatures, the carving up of nations in a single night, Moscow called them liars. Western historians who cited evidence were dismissed as propagandists. Families of those deported, executed, or erased under the Pact's terms were told their memories were false and their grief misplaced. Official Soviet history painted the Pact as a necessary delay, a defensive maneuver, nothing more. The protocol that sealed the fate of millions was, according to the Kremlin, a fabrication. But documents do not stay buried forever. In the late 1980s, as the Soviet system began to crack, the archives opened. Researchers found what Moscow had denied for half a century. The original protocol, signed by Molotov and Ribbentrop, with Stalin's approval stamped across the annexation of sovereign nations. The maps were there. The handwriting was there. The truth, preserved in ink and paper, could no longer be erased. The confirmation did not bring closure. It brought new conflict. Today, the memory of the Pact still shapes the borders, the politics, and the fears of Eastern Europe. In the Baltic states, it is a reminder of occupation and loss. In Poland, it is a wound that never fully healed. In Russia, the debate over the protocol's morality remains unresolved. Some call it a tragic necessity. Others call it a crime that was never fully accounted for. The question of who bears responsibility and what that responsibility demands has never been settled. The Pact ended in 1941. Its consequences never did.